us again this year. We're very happy to have him here. Joins us from the Belgrade School of Management and private at the University of Belgrade in Serbia. So I shall hand over to Dejan to talk to us about the national football team's visit to Yugoslavia in 1939.
Thank you very much. And I'm always glad to come to this conference. Always a highlight of my year. And I would also like to thank everybody for inviting me and for your attention. Today I'm going to talk about a very important football match in Yugoslav football history, not just football history but also in Yugoslav social history, even to this day, and that is the match between Yugoslav and English national football teams which took place in Belgrade in May 1939. Now, looking back over the last 100 years, because almost nearly a century has passed since Yugoslav Football Association was established, very few football matches played by the national team lingered in national memory for so long and radiated with such exceptional glow as the match between Yugoslavia and England took place in Belgrade in May 1939. And reasons why this match was so important and cherished by many, both football enthusiasts and people who did not care about football that much, were abundant and very diverse in nature. It wasn't just the fact that Yugoslav victory was seen as a proof that Yugoslavs were exceptional footballers and that football played in the country was of the highest standard, but also various political, social and economic circumstances made this match much more than mere sporting event. And ultimately, in the turbulent times colored by the rise of Nazism and presentiment that fragile peace might be in mortal danger, one football match was also perceived as an act of friendship, even alliance. In this presentation, I wish to portray as much as possible all the fine levels and layers which made one football match one of the most cornerstone events of Yugoslav interwar social history. And first we have to talk a bit about geopolitics and economy because it's very important in this case. Now, by spring of 1939, Europe was in incredible turmoil, with everyone expecting the spark which could ignite the flames of war and finally destroy the fragile system set up in Versailles in 1919. And Yugoslavia was especially in precarious position as it was created in 1918, unifying all the Southern Slavs. But its creation meant that all of its neighbors, especially those who were on the losing side in the First World War, were somehow withheld. And even more dangerously, the main enemy of Yugoslavia in the interwar period was Italy, who had aspirations towards the east coast of the Adriatic. Surrounded by enemies and revisionist countries, Yugoslavia forged alliance with Romania and Czechoslovakia, which was backed by France and to some extent Britain. However, because of French policy to appease Italy, Yugoslavia gradually lost direct French support, which caused major re-examination of the Yugoslavian position in Europe. Feeling abandoned and exposed to major German economic and political pressure, Yugoslavia was trying to balance between the two blocs. But still, despite the declining French political and economic support, the vast majority of people felt they didn't need to choose sides, as the sides had been chosen in 1914. Now, this sense of all allegiance reflected to all social interactions and perceptions. Before the First World War, Serbs and other Yugoslavs considered Britain as a distant and unknown country, whose global imperial goals often meant support to Serbia's enemies, such as the Ottoman Empire. However, the alliance forged in the Great War changed perception completely. Cold, distant and calculated Britons, as they were seen by the Serbs, were now seen as friends and comrades in arms, and various medical and humanitarian missions and actions, help to the wounded and the sick and care for orphan Serbian children, forged mutual respect, friendship and sense of admiration. Now, in the interwar period, was a time of huge breakthrough for British influence in Yugoslavia, both based on what today we call soft power and solid economic and political support. Masterpieces of British literature were translated to Serbian, exhibitions of British artists were organized, and more people were interested to find out more about British culture and way of life, and more people were interested to learn the language. And naturally, one of the most striking features of British way of life, at least to an average Yugoslav, was the British love for sports, football in particular. In the eve of the Second World War, those Yugoslavs who opposed Nazism, and that was the overwhelming majority of the population, looked upon Britain as an inspiration and an ally. Now, Yugoslavia was a young sporting nation, and in the period we're interested in, the organized football competitions only celebrated its 20th birthday. Informal footballing structures, of course, existed sometimes before the First World War, but Yugoslav FA was only founded in 1919, and the first national football championship was staged only in 1923. Also, at the very beginning, the quality of football played in Yugoslavia was very low, and Yugoslav footballers were amateurs in every sense of the word. And results of the first international attempts were quite disastrous. In 1920, Yugoslavia participated in the Olympic Games in Antwerp and lost disastrously both of the matches it played, 7-0 to Czechoslovakia and 4-2 to Egypt. However, things gradually improved. Regular domestic competitions promote several talented youngsters to the national team. Several skillful foreign players and coaches, mostly from Hungary, Austria and Czechoslovakia, joined Yugoslav football teams, and technical and tactical improvement was evident. The first really international competitive generation of Yugoslav footballers emerged in the late 1920s with the tremendous victory over the French national team in Paris in May 1929. The pinnacle of Yugoslav footballing success in the interwar period was the semi-final of the first ever held World Cup in Uruguay in 1930. Yugoslavia managed to beat Brazil and Bolivia and progressed to semi-finals, just to lose to domestic team in a match most journalists saw as very dubious and fishy. Still, Yugoslav football enthusiasts were thrilled and saw success in Uruguay as something upon which the national football team should build its dominance in Europe in the forthcoming years. However, this dominance never happened. Despite some outstanding performances during the 1930s, like victories over Hungary, France, Czechoslovakia, and incredible 8-4 victory over Brazil in 1934, Yugoslavia failed to qualify for 1934 and 38 World Championships, constantly leaving the impression of a team that fails to meet expectations. Not just expectations of domestic football fans, but also expectations of the football experts throughout Europe. Now, this sense of incompleteness and underachievement was certainly one of the main factors why Yugoslav football public for so long wanted for its national team to play against England, which was considered to be without competition the best football team in the world. Yugoslav football officials had been trying for a very long time to arrange a friendly football match between the two sides. As a matter of fact, the president of Yugoslav FA, Mihailo Andrejević, seen on the picture right, told the press in 1939 that this, and I quote, "This match was our wish from the day we founded our association." But until May 1939, this never came to be. Reading the memoirs of the Yugoslav footballers and football officials of the time, a hint could be caught that this was mainly due to the fact that English FA asked for substantial financial compensation for traveling abroad, and Yugoslavs were not able to cover the costs. However, the breakthrough happened in 1938 when Andrejević was invited as a guest of honor to the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the FA and the match between England and the rest of Europe, which was held in London in October 1938. During this occasion, he discussed the issue with William Pickford, president of the FA, and apparently the initial arrangement has been agreed, but no details were revealed at the time. No firm dates were set, and no financial compensation was disclosed. Now, some researchers suggest that this development had a lot to do with the fact that British governmental officials encouraged sporting exchanges with nations like Yugoslavia, especially in late 1930s, as it was realized that it could have a huge positive impact on British national interests. Sporting propaganda was regarded as a very powerful tool of promoting British soft power in the world. Still, financial arrangements had to be sound. Yugoslav FA managed to get financial backing from the Yugoslav government, and the Ministry of Physical Education actually provided a grant to the YFA because of the, and I quote, tremendous sporting, cultural and political significance the match between the two nations had, and also because the match would be the crown of the celebration of the 20th anniversary of the Yugoslav FA. And about 240,000 dinars, Yugoslav currency, and I've been trying to find out how much that would be in pounds, but wasn't very much successful. Approximately, dinar was similar to French franc at that time, so I will try to find that and send it to you later. But it was a huge, substantial amount of money for Yugoslav standards. Was to be paid to the FA for compensation, and approximately the same amount was estimated needed to cover other costs such as accommodation, advertising, pitch preparations, etc. And finally, in March 1939, the England tour to Italy, Yugoslavia, and Romania was officially announced, and the match between Yugoslav and English national teams was scheduled for 18th of May. Now, similar to English national team, Yugoslav FA also arranged 3 games to be played in a very short period of time in May 1939. Yugoslavs were to travel to Bucharest and face Romania, host England in Belgrade, and finally host Italy, at a venue that was not yet decided by March 1939. Now, all these matches were supposed to be a part of the national celebration of 20 years of organized football in the country, and of course, with both official and unofficial world champions visiting, it was certainly the biggest and most important footballing event ever staged in Yugoslavia. The significance of it can be verified by a rather unusual event, which was staged on the evening of May the 3rd, when Yugoslav Minister for Physical Education spoke over the wireless about the forthcoming football matches. And his speech, which was rather an unprecedented event, because in Yugoslavia the wireless radio technology was not that common, and it was a very rare occasion that public officials, prime ministers, and others would speak directly to people. So in his speech, the minister, Simon, right, said he was sure that our sportsmen, conscious of the difficult task ahead of them, will do their best to defend the reputation and honor of both Yugoslav sport and state. So with this, you can see how important it was for the government as well. But despite its importance, pressure from the state officials and huge public interest, the whole affair started off on the wrong foot and was ultimately marked by various difficulties. Now, first major issue was the fact that Yugoslav team performed terribly in the first match against Romania in Bucharest, losing 1-0. Now, Romania was by no means a weak opponent, and competing with them was never easy, especially when playing away. But it was not the result which caused the concern, but the performance, which was described as appalling. And as a matter of fact, one newspaper actually wrote that one Yugoslav who lived in Bucharest for a very long time and saw the match told the reporter he never felt more ashamed for being Yugoslav. Now, this is clearly a dramatic overstatement, but general impression was that the national team performed very poorly and that the players were not giving their best. Now, this poor performance was a prelude to a much bigger problem which emerged only a few days before the match, and its roots were political. Now, history of Yugoslav football in the interwar period was heavily influenced by internal Yugoslav political struggles. Footballers and football clubs from different parts of the country, most notably from Croatia, were often actively involved in political manifestations that were linked with Croatian nationalist organization, supporting the idea of centralization and federalization of the country. Now, every so often, Croatian sportsmen were engaged in active boycott of the Yugoslav national team and nationwide competitions in order to put pressure to the state authorities to accept some of their political demands. Now, even the biggest Yugoslav sporting success of the period, the 1930 World Cup campaign, was achieved without help from players from Croatia. And only a few days after the match against Romania, which saw players from all over the country participating, including prominent Croatian footballers from clubs such as Građanski, Hašk, and Hajduk Split, the Croatian Football Sub-Association presented a sort of an ultimatum to the Yugoslav FA. Now, knowing how important the match against the English was, they asked for two things. First, they wanted to host the Italians somewhere in Croatia, in Zagreb or Split, and to keep the income from the match. And secondly, and politically much more important, they proposed a complete reorganization of the YFA, where the Yugoslav Association would become a sort of a confederation of ethnic football associations, which would be internationally recognized and able to arrange international matches. Now, the first demand was actually plausible, although probably not advisable, as the Italians had territorial aspirations over Croatian lands, which could turn a football match to riots and a violent affair, but the second demand was completely unacceptable. And even if the Yugoslav FA decided to accept its practical dissolution, the government and the state authorities would have rejected it. So the Yugoslav FA decided to reject the demands and stated that clubs which would forbid their players to join the national team would be punished by suspension from the association. And in this case, neither side succumbed, and several Croatian players left the national team, leaving the team management in terrible problem. A total of 5 players had to be replaced from the lineup and in the last possible moment. And the team manager, Simonovic, was furious and offered his resignation, but the YFA rejected it. The team that would face the English was still good, but it was general consent that in the public that small chance that existed to remain undefeated with the complete team was now gone. And the biggest problem was the position of goalkeeper, because the reserve goalkeeper was only an 18-year debutant. He was a very talented player, but he did not play an official football match for the national team, and it was seen as somebody who would probably fail to meet the expectations. Now, the English delegation arrived in Belgrade from Italy on 16th of May in the afternoon, and it was greeted by a cheering crowd at the Belgrade railway station. Now, the Yugoslav football officials asked the people to meet the English players at the train station, but even without the invitation, the mass of people was quite huge and very enthusiastic. About 1,000 of football fans, mostly boys and teenagers, were saluting the guests from England and asking for players' autographs. And the English delegation, led by Stanley Rouse and Tom Whittaker, was welcomed by the UYFA president Andrejevic. They were staying in the best and most luxurious hotel in Belgrade, called the Serbian King, and everything about their stay was pre-arranged, including the training sessions, meetings, and even the small things like food preparation. Day before the match, a banquet of honor was organized for the guests by the YFA and Ministry for Physical Education, and the minister himself hosted the English footballers, saying that welcoming them was the highest honor he ever had during his career. So you can see a few pictures. I apologize for the quality, but the quality of scanned newspapers in Serbian libraries is quite terrible. But I imagine you can. I recognize Stanley Rouse on the right. So also children watching the training session of the English team. So on the day of the match, thousands of people gathered around the stadium hours before kickoff, with many trying to get hold of the tickets. Approximately 40,000 tickets had been sold, which meant that about additional 10,000 people were cramped to the standing terraces, as the maximum capacity of the stadium was around 30,000. Football fans came to the match from all over the country, some even from other countries as well, as about 200 football fans came from Bulgaria via special train just to see English footballers. For those who were not lucky enough to get hold of the tickets, local authorities installed huge loudspeakers for them to listen to the wireless broadcast. The weather was warm and sunny, an ideal weather for the game of football. The announced squads were, for England, Woodley, Mail, Hapgood, Willingham, Cullis, Mercer, Matthews, Hall, Lawton, Golden and Broom, and for Yugoslavia, Lovrić, Požega, Dubac, Manola, Dragicevic, Lehner, Glišović, Vujadinović, Petrović, Matošić, and Perlić. Now, journalists agreed that the English team was probably the best which could be assembled. On the other hand, it was more than evident that Yugoslavs will miss their Croatian superstars. Most positions were satisfactorily covered, but the position of goalkeeper, as already mentioned, was very, very dodgy. Now, reports from the match, this is interesting, this is a commemorative postcard issued for the occasion, featuring English footballers, also some pictures from the football match, the captains shaking hands and exchanging banners, also some of the photographs taken. Yeah, okay, so reports from the match suggest that the tempo of the game was quite high and that Yugoslav footballers surprisingly started very offensively and aggressively. The starting initiative was with the Yugoslav team, which attacked rapidly, especially through the flanks. And the English apparently didn't expect that, and their opening of the match was marked by confusion. Initial aggressiveness paid off to the Yugoslav as they took an early lead, with Glišović scoring in 15th minute of the game. And after the conceded goal, the English managed to pull themselves together and to attempt to equalize. The tempo was still very high, but now both teams were creating serious scoring opportunities. However, it was apparently a day of glory for the young debutant goalkeeper Lovrić, who managed to thwart all English attempts to score. And the halftime result was 1-0 for Yugoslavia, with the second half started completely the opposite to the first. Now, the England was aggressive and dangerous, and Yugoslavs were confused. And in 49th minute, Frank Broom managed to score, exploring the mistake of Yugoslav centre half. At this moment, the game was entirely in English hands. They continued to press on, and it seemed that the second goal was looming in the air. But young Lovrić saved the Yugoslavs from conceding. And then, all of a sudden, when nobody expected it, the Yugoslavs managed to organize a quick counterattack. Long ball reached left winger Perlić, who collided with fullback Mail, but quickly managed to get up and sprint towards the goal unmarked, and he was left one-on-one with Woodley and managed to score. The English continued to press on for an equalizer, and the Yugoslav continued to defend with occasional dangerous counterattacks. Both teams had their chances until the end, but the result did not change, and Yugoslavs managed to win. Now, Yugoslav public was obviously thrilled with the win. Everything else was forgotten. Even the fact that Yugoslavs were to face Italy in a few days' time and subsequently lose did not matter, as they were able to do what the world champions weren't, to beat the English. The entire 1939 was a terrible year for Yugoslav football, as the victory over the English was actually the only one achieved in 6 matches played, but it wasn't important. The ethos of victory over the best team in the world was so overpowering that people began to see it as an illustration of the national character. One newspaper article stated that, and I quote, "Achievement of our national team represents, both for us and the entire world, another proof of the capability of our people to compete as equal and worthy advisory to anyone, in any cultural or sporting competition, even if we don't enjoy the same opportunities in life." The English perception of the game was much more down to earth. The British press acknowledged that Yugoslav victory was fair and square, although certain circumstances which disadvantaged the English team were noted. It was hot day, hard pitch, the referee was inconsistent, and the fact that Stanley Matthews suffered a slight knock during the first half prevented him from expressing his full skills. However, there were no complaints over the final result. As a matter of fact, diplomatic and political circles were very pleased with the match. The fact that Yugoslav Prime Minister attended, along with many distinguished ministers and other dignitaries, spoke volumes. One diplomatic correspondent, comparing the matches in which Yugoslavia hosted England and Italy, wrote that Italian players were booed off the field at the end of the game, Italian flag was torn up, the team's bus was stoned, and Yugoslav ministers made certain derogatory comments, while the English minister attracted demonstrative ovations a fortnight earlier, and Yugoslav ministers were praising the gentlemanly conduct of English players. Now, the only dark spot on the event was the result of Yugoslav oversensitivity and of the fact that Yugoslavs were not actually accustomed to British sense of humor. A few days after the match, Yugoslav papers reported that the reporter of Daily Express wrote that English team had lost because the footballers were starving for their entire stay in Yugoslavia. Apparently, according to him, not only that Yugoslav cuisine was so heavily dependent on garlic to the point that the English couldn't eat the food, but also that even the cooking pots and pans were infused by garlic essences to such extent that they couldn't be used for preparing the food that would be garlic-free. Now, the level to which the Yugoslav public was insulted by this was actually ridiculous. And even the chef of the King of Serbia hotel was interviewed, and he provided the entire menu for the English team to the readers. It's given to the right, with no trace of garlic anywhere. And also, the press tried to discredit the Daily Express reporter, and it was published that he spent around 100 dinars on food daily, which meant that he ate for 3 people, which was obviously then not a problem for him and to enjoy the local food, whether it was garlic-free or not. And primarily, the ludicrous response to a bad joke showed how important this victory was to the Yugoslavs. And I would say that even to this day, for the people who actually have no living memory of it, the victory over England in 1939 represent one of the highlights of Yugoslav and Serbian footballing history. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dejan. Does anyone want to kick off with a question?
Thanks ever so much for that. Just to pick up on that final point, that I've come across English club teams in the 1930s playing on the continent at the end of the English season and not doing well, and then going home and making excuses to their local newspaper. The same sort of excuses about the referee, or the travel. So it's interesting that the footballers accepted losing, and yet if English cricketers lost to Australia, that was a national disaster. So it's strange that the English saw football different from their cricket.
Yeah. But what I think is quite interesting is the fact that although it wasn't true that England was invincible, that England was some sort of superhuman power in world football, the local press and local football enthusiasts actually kind of tried to promote this notion, try to promote that somebody invincible is coming, that the aliens are coming and we're to face the aliens, and whatever happens, it's fine because the most important thing is just to face them. Which was quite strange. Even some of the newspapers actually printed false arguments. They actually stated a team that never lost on continent comes to play in Yugoslavia. I would imagine that this was due to the fact that they wanted to encourage, well, not to encourage, they wanted to strengthen their own reputation in case of possible victory. As for the excuses, it's always similar with every nation. So when Yugoslavia loses, playing away, especially by a country nobody expected Yugoslavia to lose, it's always the same thing. We traveled by train for 3 days, and it was exhausting. It was either muddy, or the pitch was terrible, or the referee was doing something bad. So I think it's kind of a universal thing when facing a defeat.
Given the regard that they held for the English, were there any English coaches and trainers working in Yugoslavia?
Most of the foreign coaches that came to work to Yugoslavia came from Austria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. There were some English coaches, but at the very beginning of Yugoslav football in early 1920s, and they predominantly coached English teams. Can't remember the names at this stage, but I tracked down a few of them. They were moderately successful footballers at the beginning of the 20th century, playing for clubs like Bolton Wanderers or something like that. But nobody actually lingered on for a longer period of time. And most of them were actually globetrotters. I later managed to find them working in Turkey or working in Russia before the revolution. Before they came to Yugoslavia. So Yugoslavia was not a place where an English footballer or football coach would go. And I think one of the main reasons is the fact that Yugoslavia had a very ambiguous stand towards professionalism, because it was officially prohibited for a footballer or a coach to be paid by the club. So they had to create certain loopholes in a way. For instance, a footballer who would sign for a club would be, let's say, fictively employed, working for a company that was owned by the member of the board of the football club. So he would basically just train and play football, but on paper he was not a professional. On paper he worked for another company. And this lingered on for the entire interwar period, and after the Second World War, it actually was integral part of socialist sporting philosophy in Yugoslavia, that you cannot be professional in sports, and only in the 1970s that changed. So that was one of the reasons why English coaches and players did not come to Yugoslavia.
One more short one, anyone? Checking on my end. I was just interested when you were talking about the relationship between state and sport.
Yep.
And I wondered whether organisations like the FA and the Ministry for Physical Education, all that kind of stuff, how that relationship worked.
Well, basically, the thing was, sporting associations were organizations of private initiative, and they were founded by enthusiasts. However, the political dynamics of Yugoslavia in interwar period had a profound influence on every organization, not just political but sporting organizations as well. In 1929, the constitution was suspended. The democracy was actually suspended because of the imminent danger of civil war, actually, and the monarch actually imposed tyranny in a way. At that particular moment, the Ministry for Physical Education was created. It sounds quite unusual. Why would that be needed? But Ministry for Physical Education was set up to control sporting organizations, associations, because they were seen as potentially politically dangerous, especially in parts of the country like Croatia and Slovenia, because they were linked. They were linked with nationalist organizations, and many of the sporting officials actually were prominent members of various political organizations. So this was kind of a attempt to impose certain level of political control over sports. However, the state did not interfere in the sense of appointing chairmen of the FA or doing things like that. They were not interested in that. They were just interested that all the sporting associations would follow the state line regarding internal political organization of the country. They also had a very powerful tool to manipulate sporting organizations, because a lot of clubs actually asked for governmental subsidies to maintain their stadiums and to travel abroad, or for basic needs. And the government actually used this tool. So if you want to get a grant, you have to dance to our tune, in a way. So this was actually policy was very strong from 1929 to 1934-35, and later on it was much more easygoing in a way, up to the point that in 1939 it wasn't that important anymore. Even the most ridiculous demands of all the clubs were actually been accepted by automatism in a way. It just became a matter of bureaucracy and not politics.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.